Okay, well, hello everybody, and welcome to show number 135 from Engage for Success. I'm Jo Moffat, founder and MD of Woodreed. We're a specialist ad agency, and we believe in treating employees like customers. What that means is that we use the techniques, the creativity, and the brand thinking which marketeers use on the outside to engage external audiences. We use them on the inside to engage internal audiences and create successful, high-performing cultures of engaged employees. I'm also part of the Engage for Success Guru group and have been hosting this show now for over 2 years. So interestingly, today is a bit of a sort of trial for us. I think at Engage for Success, we're trialing a new delivery format for the radio show and actually turning it more into a live video stream. So for those people who are new to us, welcome. And for our older listeners who've been listening for the last couple of years, you can still hear us through Blog Talk Radio and all the usual channels, but you'll also be able to find us on YouTube as well. So my guest this week, and I'm very pleased to have him back, he's a returner to Engage for Success Radio, is Ian Dodds. Hello, Ian.
Oh, hello, Jo.
And Ian was actually my very first guest when I did my very first Engage for Success radio show over 2 years ago. Ian, you were my first guinea pig on this. 2.5 years or so later, it's good to have you back. So Ian is a consultant. Well, you're also part of the Guru group at Engage for Success.
I'm actually on the Guru steering group.
Right, which means...
and have been so since its inception.
Right, and what does that mean?
Well, it means that on the Guru steering group, we first of all look at new developments which may need to be explored in terms of engagement, and also we arrange events. Okay,
and I think primarily your day job is that you're a consultant that specialises in inclusion and diversity.
Well, I mean, my background actually is in helping organisations deliver major complex changing mindsets and cultures. Mm-hmm. And I now apply that to helping them get the benefits of diversity by building inclusive cultures to leverage difference.
Okay, so this afternoon, for the next sort of 25 minutes or so, we're going to be talking specifically about inclusive leadership, something which is a powerful driver of engagement. So I suppose a sensible start point, particularly for those people who are perhaps less familiar with the concept than you are, Ian, is to ask you what does inclusive leadership actually mean? How would you define it?
Inclusive leadership involves managers who actually first of all offer a vision of future success, and they share this with the people that follow them, and they make it an inspiring and motivating vision of success. The next thing is that they listen to people and hear what they say. Mm-hmm. They empower them. They put effort into the people that work with them, helping them identify their talents and develop them. And also they put effort into leveraging difference. And that's very important for a reason which I shall come on and explain.
Okay. And of course, if we think about the Engage for Success 4 enablers, which I have conveniently on my wall over there, but obviously the camera can't see, number one is having visible, empowering leaders who can share a strong strategic narrative about the organisation, where it's come from and where it's going. But the role of leaders is obviously much more important than that in terms of what you've described. They need to model that inclusive behavior, that kind of inclusive culture.
Yeah. Well, the strategic narrative is really the vision, as well as creating dissatisfaction with the way things are now, which is usually around the fact that the world has changed.
Okay. All right.
And we need to do things differently. Okay,
so why do you think inclusive leadership then, as you've defined it, is so important for employee engagement? Why does it?
I think it's absolutely critical because there is lots and lots of research and evidence which shows that people who come from groups that are underrepresented in senior management in organizations experience unconscious bias. We all, I'm afraid, have unconscious biases and these are things we can make ourselves aware of, but it does mean that, for example, in an organization which traditionally has had white, physically abled, heterosexual, male educated managers, that, for example, women and people from ethnic minority backgrounds will tend to find that they're not listened to as much as the white men. They will find that their views are unconsciously, it's not a conscious thing, are not unconsciously taken into account. And so it's absolutely vital, if you're going to get the benefits of engagement, that you actually develop inclusive leaders. There's another important factor, and that is that I have over the years done a lot of work on leadership behavior. And leadership behavior is actually the most powerful driver of behavior in any organization. This was shown by Professor Ed Shine some 30 or 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found in the work that I've done, so I get leaders, for example, a leadership team, to identify the behaviors they need to model to drive their strategy. And these always include inclusive and engaging behaviors. And then I get them each to nominate 6 observers who score them on a pulse survey basis online, anonymously, every 3 or 4 months on their practice of those behaviors. And would you believe it? The behaviors, I've done hundreds and hundreds of these, the behaviors which managers consistently score lowest on are exactly those associated with inclusive engagement. Listening to people, empowering people, helping them understand their talents and helping them develop those talents, and also putting effort into understanding their differences and leveraging them.
So why?
And I would actually go as far as to say that in actual fact, the low skills of engaging managers is one of the reasons why we have such low productivity in this country.
So why do you think those scores are consistently the ones that are scoring the low? Well, those characteristics of behaviours are consistently scoring the lowest, Ian?
It's a very interesting question, Joe. I believe we've actually been through a transactional age, and it's not just me that thinks this. The very eminent strategic guru, Professor Michael Porter, some years ago, about 4 years ago, he published an article in the Harvard Business Review where he explained that short-term capitalism has failed. And what happened is in the late 1970s, when the great economist Milton Friedman said that organizations only needed to measure their success on shareholder value, it meant that the management approach became very transactional.
Right.
So it was command control, it was measurement against targets, and it was short term.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to that, I believe we actually had transformational management, where organizations really looked long term at how they would motivate their employees and deliver success through that. But it changed with Milton Friedman. And in fact, Michael Porter is now leading a world-class movement to actually go for what he calls long-term shared stakeholder value capitalism, which looks after the long-term interests of all of the stakeholders.
So
that's employees and customers. So in the transactional age, for example, we now have in this country something like 7 million working poor. And that's because employers have paid their employees the least they can get away with.
Okay, Ian, what was that phrase again? Because it was quite a mouthful. Long-term shared.
This comes from Michael Porter, and he calls what we need in the future is a long-term shared stakeholder value capitalism.
God, it's quite a mouthful, isn't it?
It is quite a mouthful. It doesn't run off the tongue.
So this is something then that, would you say that I'm kind of going off going off topic a bit here, but it's really interesting. Is that something then, if we talk about the 7 million working poor, is that a function of organisations paying minimum wage and actually need?
Well, I mean, it's actually if you follow shareholder value, basically you pay your employees the least you can get away with.
Right.
You give your customers the least good service you can give them, and so forth. It's only when you look after the long-term interests of all of the shareholders that you then make sure that employees are paid a reasonable, motivating and living wage.
So in other words, if you think only about the short-term shareholder value, it is the cheapest, cost-cutting, lowest common denominator stuff. But actually that's
absolutely, because what you want to do is maximize the short-term value to shareholders.
But by thinking long
and that's all that matters.
Yeah, and so thinking longer term, you actually start to recognise that actually, whilst that may not be so good for the shareholder in the short term, in the longer term, it's better for everybody, customer experience, employee experience, and ultimately shareholder experience as well. Rightio. Okay. So so this is something you've sort of believed in for a long time, and clearly it's the inclusive leadership, as you say, all ties up with this. And can you give us some examples of organisations who've embraced this concept and how that has delivered success?
What I'd like to do, first of all, is just tell you a couple of stories.
We like a good story.
One story is when I was a young man at an early stage in my career. I was made what nowadays would have been called HR director of a large chemicals factory in Huddersfield, which had very low productivity. It had awful employee relations, and it was in danger of being closed. And I did what my predecessors had done. I worked with the managers to try and change that. And we made a bit of progress, but not much.
Right.
And then one night I was driving home and I'd had a particularly gruesome day. And as it happened, I'd grown up at a council estate. And I was thinking, you know, when my mum and dad came home from work, they often used to spend time in the evening talking about if only their managers would do this and if only their managers would do that. And of course, they never saw it as their place to tell their managers, and their managers never asked. And it suddenly dawned on me that there must be 2,000 or 3,000 people from this factory going home and telling their families and friends that what a shower the management are on that factory, and if only they did this, and if only they did that.
Right.
And so the very next day, I went into the factory director, and this is absolutely true. I said, Bill, what we need to do here is to engage the whole of the workforce in making this the best factory in ICI, which was then the largest chemical group in the world, and that factory was a part of it. And we talked for a while, and then he said, Ian, we'll go for that, but you will have to show me how to do it. Well, I have to tell you, I was relatively fresh from university. I had not a clue, but I didn't let on. What I did is I went away and I rang up my contacts in ICI's headquarters, and I was put in touch with Professor Dick Beckhardt. He is the most famous behavioural change guru that ever existed.
Okay.
And I got tutoring from Dick on what to do. And so first of all, we developed, he got me to work with the executive team of the factory and develop a vision of success for that factory in 5 years' time. And then he got me to get to brief all of the managers and team leaders on it and get it cascaded right down the organization.
Right.
And every manager and team leader was asked to ask their team what will help and what will hinder us from delivering this vision. And all of that information had to be put on flip charts, sent in to me, and my team analyzed it. And then I worked with the executive team to develop a strategy for delivering this vision over the next 5 years. Well, there is what is known as the Beckhardt change equation, which says vision plus dissatisfaction. Well, we had the vision, the dissatisfaction we'd also already told people is the world has changed and we've got to change. We had a strategy, so we had a plan of action. And that has got to be greater than the cost of change to people. And I said to Professor Beckhardt, I said, Dick, what do we do about the cost of change? And he said, Ian, he said, what you need to do is to train managers to listen to people, to empower them, help them identify their talents and develop them. And he said, I'm going to put you in touch with Development Dimensions International, and they will train you to be able to do that. And so I became a master trainer in interactive management and targeted management, which does all of those things. And I trained all of the managers on the factory to do those things: listen to people, empower them, understand their differences, and help them develop their talents.
Okay.
5 years later, the chairman of ICI came to the factory and that was Sir John Harvey Jones, who some of you might have seen on the Troubleshooters, which he used to host on BBC TV, came to congratulate it on becoming one of the best factories in the group. The factory, which was in danger of closing when I first went there, is still there in Huddersfield this very day, offering employment. Not as ICI, but as Syngenta.
Okay.
Now there is a sequel to this, because about 5 years ago rather, I was actually speaking on a platform at Harvard Business School. And on the same platform that day was Professor Scott E. Page. And he told a story of how one night he was feeling a little bit bored, and as you would, he decided to set up a computer program with one group of artificial agents who were bright but homogeneous, and another group of artificial agents, some bright, some not so bright, but diverse. Then he gave them a difficult problem to solve. And he said he was astonished that every time the diverse group outperformed the bright group of experts. And so, as a mathematician, he set about proving it.
Okay.
Seeing what was happening.
Yeah.
And there is now the diversity trumps ability theorem.
Right.
This shows that a diverse group of people will consistently outperform a bright group of experts in solving a complex problem. There's one condition: they must listen to each other and explore differing ideas and points of view. Now we're back to that factory. When I'd worked with the managers, they were all white young men. They'd been to prestigious universities like Oxford and Cambridge, Imperial College London, and they'd studied science. So bright and expert they were, but their diversity was incredibly narrow. When I'd engaged the whole of the factory, I'd massively multiplied the diversity, not only in terms of visible diversity, but in terms of people's life experiences, people's work experience, diversity of thought, diversity of problem solving. And what's more, remember, I'd actually taught all the managers to listen to people. So we'd met the condition. So that factory was an example of diversity trumps ability.
Right.
And what's more, we'd also, although you didn't call it that at that time, we'd also created an inclusive culture, and we developed inclusive leaders. And you mentioned earlier on, I think, about Joe, about the leaders modeling behavior. And I'd also actually worked with the managers to identify the behaviors they needed to model, and ensured they got feedback on how they did it. Okay.
So, I mean, that all plays as well to the other, or certainly the enabler around employee voice, doesn't it? And having managers, the role of managers in terms of actually being able to listen and respond to that.
Yeah. I can give you another example, Joe. I'm going to open up a little quote on my my smartphone, I suppose I should say nowadays. And because some years later, I was coaching the officer in charge of the largest office in HMRC. And he was newly appointed. And one day he said to me, Ian, he said, I discovered that we're one of the worst performers in HMRC, and I want to change that, and I want you to help me. So I actually followed the process that I learned from Professor Dick Beckard, and we did all the things we did on the factory. And then 2 years later, it was one of the best performers in HMRC. So much so that HMRC was under pressure to allow a fly-on-the-wall reporter from the Sunday Telegraph into one of its offices for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And the reporter went to that office. And 6 weeks later, there was a full-page article in the Sunday Telegraph business pages. And this is a quote from it. "I don't think I have ever been in an office with a greater sense of purpose, contentment, candor, coherence, or vigor." And that's because, once again, we'd actually developed an inclusive leadership approach. Mm-hmm. And that was the result that, I mean, obviously, that reporter had expected to find anything but that sort of office, that sort of culture and climate in a civil service office.
How long does it take to make that kind of change, Ian?
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, on the factory that I talked about, it took us 5 years. Mm-hmm. Because the changes we had to bring about were very considerable indeed. Mm-hmm. In terms of attitude. But in terms of that office in the Inland Revenue, that's 2 years. And in fact, once I'd frankly got more experience, because I've done these kind of approaches in lots of organizations now, it generally speaking takes 2 years.
Right.
More recently, for example, Cisco Systems in EMEA, the American head office had really learned that the key to innovation was inclusive leadership and collaboration. And I was asked to help them do that in EMEA. Mm-hmm. And what I did was I worked with the leadership teams across EMEA to identify the behaviors that they needed to practice to actually build an inclusive culture. Mm-hmm. And act as, it's an inclusive and collaborative culture.
Right.
This time, instead of them getting feedback from nominated observers, what they did was in the annual engagement survey, they put an inclusion index. And this covered the behaviors that these leaders needed to practice, or all the managers needed to practice to be inclusive leaders.
Okay.
And the engagement survey, which was then done on a 6-monthly basis for a while, mm-hmm. They were scored on their practice of these behaviors. And their score on the inclusion index informed their performance bonus. And there was also a threshold below which they could not be promoted.
Right.
So they had to get above that threshold to be promoted. Okay. And once again, that was a huge success mm-hmm. in developing inclusive leadership in Cisco Systems EMEA.
Okay. Ian, we're nearly coming to the end of our half hour. So I wonder whether we can perhaps just wrap things up with some practical pointers for listeners to take away. What kind of practical things could somebody put in place almost tomorrow, or is it more complex?
Yeah, okay. If you want to short circuit this, one of the things is interactive effectiveness. Harvard Business Review, April 2012, the theme was great teams, and several eminent professors had done research on what makes for a great team. Mm-hmm. And what they all found was that the limiting factor for a great team was interactive effectiveness. And Professor Sandy Pentland, one of the people who had a paper in the Harvard Business Review, said interactive effectiveness is more important to a great team than the skills and intelligence of all the team members and all of the other factors combined that go to make a great team. And so what, excuse me, I do apologize. What you can do to short circuit this is to train your managers to be interactively effective. There are 17 interactive behaviors which can be identified. These are telling ones, like what I'm doing at the moment, giving information, making suggestions, summarizing, and so forth. And there are seeking ones, like seeking information, seeking suggestions, checking understanding. And Joe, you're nodding and acknowledging what I'm saying. That is a seeking one because it encourages the speaker to continue speaking, and that's particularly important if they're not too confident.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And if you can get your managers and team leaders proficient in these 17 interactive behaviors, it makes a huge amount of difference.
Okay.
And I've done a lot of coaching on this, and of course, in the first instance, what you find is when I observe say a team leader, and I actually analyze the interactive behaviors that they're using, the first thing that comes across is that they're using very few seeking behaviors.
Right.
Secondly, they use very few summarizing and checking understanding. And Terry Morgan and Neil Rackham, who did the research on this, showed that if more than 10% of the interactive behaviors in any business meeting are summarizing and checking understanding, people have a better understanding of the issues, a better understanding of what's been agreed, and there's better follow through. Okay. And so what I have to do is to coach them to actually improve their practice, well, their ability to use the seeking behaviors, seeking suggestions, seeking information, checking understanding, acknowledging, and summarizing as well.
Okay, so what you're saying there, Ian, then is that we need to do more seeking and more summarizing, more checking understanding.
Absolutely.
What I did there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good summary.
Lovely. All right, then. That's excellent. Good. Well, we've come to the end of our show. So thank you very much for a really insightful 30 minutes, as always.
Well, thank you.
It's great to have you. And I hope everyone's found that as useful and valuable as I.
Sure. And if anyone has any questions or follow-up, please don't hesitate to contact me.
Okay. Thank you very much. And goodbye, everybody.